This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
We've had sword swallower Dan Meyer both on our old show and the Stuff File program several times, but not recently. The last time he was on was in 2016. But Dan has a new book out that he co-wrote with someone that you do hear very often on this show. In fact, Marc Hartzman, the curator of WeirdHistorian.com, is on regularly with the Weird Story of the Month. Well, together they have written a book called To the Hilt, a sword swallower's history of sword swallowing. They both join us via Zoom. Hi, guys.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for being on the program with us. And first of all, off the bat, I'm glad you've titled the book To the Hilt, because no one knows what that means, and they don't know what hilt means. I do. But now, I mean, it truly does apply to this book.
Oh, it does. 100% to the hilt. That's how we do it.
Absolutely. First of all, how did you guys get together?
Mark and I met, it must have been 2001 or 2002 at the Sideshow Gathering and Sword Swallowers Convention in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And then we've been friends ever since then. We connect up at Ripley's in different locations around the country. Where was it that we met up once, Mark? Was it Connecticut?
The Greenwich Museum, or the Bruce Museum in Greenwich, where you were doing a lecture on Edith Clifford's sword collection that you own. It was on display there in an exhibit, a circus exhibit it had. And I was writing a story then for AOL Weird News about it. Brought my daughters with me, and we wrote a story about you in your lecture then. So that was a lot of fun.
And I swallowed her saw that was 110 years old that she had swallowed in 1910. I swallowed it, and you took a photo of it that ended up becoming a Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon. So it was a memorable day for me. So,
and I think my headline was "Man Swallows 100-Year-Old Museum Exhibit."
Yes.
So how did you guys get together and decide that you were going to write a book?
When in 1997, when I first started researching sword swallowing, I met up with a giant named George the Giant. I asked him about sword swallowing. He said, I'll give you 2 tips. Number 1, it's extremely dangerous. 29 people have died doing it. Number 2, don't try it. Well, that didn't dissuade me. It made me really want to find those, he said there were less than a dozen sword swallowers left in the world today. So I set about to hunt them down and find every tidbit of information about sword swallowing and make it an obsession to learn how to swallow a sword. In doing so, I found there weren't very many books. And as I would collect the research, I put it together into the Sword Swallowers Hall of Fame, which became the Sword Swallowers Association International, swordswallow.com, and swordswallow.org. And I realized I had enough material here for a beautiful history book. And I knew that Mark was a great writer. So I reached out to him about 7 years ago. I said, hey, man, you want to take some of these stories and help me repolish them and put them into a book? And he said, sure. And we kind of worked on it, and we've been doing it ever since.
From your point of view, Mark, this is something that's right up your alley.
Yeah, I mean, I always have loved Sideshow. I wrote American Sideshow back in 2005, and lots of articles about sideshow performers, and all of my interest in sideshow has kind of branched out into the other odd topics that I've written about and that you and I speak about every month. So it all kind of comes from the sideshow root. So it's been really great getting back to it. In fact, a lot of the sword swallowers we spoke to were people I'd interviewed and met when I wrote American Sideshow. So it was kind of nice reconnecting. The book has biographies of more than 80 historical sword swallowers and tons of amazing old photographs of ephemera. And then as well as that, we also have stories. It's a section we call Cutting Up Jackpots, which is carny or sideshow lingo for, swapping stories, basically. So we spoke to a lot of the modern day sword swallowers to get their really remarkable stories and adventures in swallowing swords, whether it was how they learned or, weird things that happened, injuries along the way, just any kind of bizarre, amazing story that they would share with us. So that's sort of the back half of the book is the modern day sword swallowers.
Well, Dan, speaking of injuries, you said earlier that when you talked to George that he said, don't do it, don't try it. So was there any trepidation in putting this in print for
Yes.
young hands to see?
Good question.
Yes, actually, that is a very good question. We were very careful that the book is not a how-to book. It describes the stories of people, their lives, their injuries, their deaths, their adventures, but it's not a step-by-step how-to. although it does give an awful lot of information that I wish I would have had in 1997 when I started. So no, it's not a how-to book. We are very, very careful to not give away too many of the, and there aren't really any secrets. It's just, it takes most people, it took me 14,000 unsuccessful attempts. I practiced 10 to 12 times a day, every day for 4 years, about 14,000 unsuccessful attempts. I had a student I mentored for 10 years, and he still can't get a sword down to this day. But it takes most people 3 to 5 years, some 5 to 10 years to learn how to swallow a sword. So for all of your listeners, do not try this at home.
Well, when I hear...
We actually have, if I could just add really quick, we actually have a real doctor's warning in the book to not try this at home.
Well,
yes.
And in multiple places in the book, we repeat that message.
Well, Dan, when I hear you say unsuccessful attempts, to me, that cannot go good. I mean, what for you is an unsuccessful attempt at swallowing a sword?
For most people, it's several months to several years of just hitting the back of the throat, hitting the gag reflex, and learning to overcome the gag reflex. I still have a gag reflex, but I've learned to overcome it and repress it. Then you have to find the proper alignment down into the epiglottis and find the opening into the epiglottis. You flip open the epiglottis, slide the blade down the esophagus, repress the peristalsis reflex, 22 pairs of muscles that swallows your food down into your stomach, slide it down into the chest area between the lungs. When you get to the center of the chest, you actually have to nudge the heart to the left, slide through the lower esophageal sphincter, past the liver and kidneys, down into the stomach, all the way down to the duodenum or the duodenum, the bottom of the stomach. Piece of cake. If I were to go further than that, all the way down to my fallopian tubes.
Wow, there is no navigation system for that on Google. I'm just curious. I'm just curious, Dan. When you go to a doctor for the first time and they say, and what is it you do? What's their reaction?
A lot of times I don't tell them unless I'm getting an x-ray done, and then I'll bring a sword along and go, oh, by the way, while we're in here, do you mind doing an x-ray for me? And I've probably got 40 or 50 x-rays with the sword in place. It's really pretty neat. They're fascinated. I've used many doctors in documentaries on History Channel, Stanley Superhumans, Discovery Channel, Learning Channel. I bring my doctor friends on, and they verify that, yes, this is really real and really dangerous.
Mm.
Yeah, those x-rays are a great way to help prove that sword swallowing is real, because that's certainly something that comes up for Dan and really every sword swallower, I believe, especially a lot of them through history, had to deal with, people in the audience not thinking it was a real act or a real stunt.
Well, Mark, again, you're the curator of WeirdHistorian.com. You bring up weird stories all the time, but a lot of the times when you talk about those stories, you're talking about a historical situation where the people are long dead in most cases of the stories that you are doing the research on. But here it is, you're doing a book with the Dan Meyer, the guy who was on several iterations of America's Got Talent across the world, and you're working with him. What did you learn that was surprising to you just by being in Dan's orbit?
Well, part of it's everything he was just describing, that the complexity of swallowing a sword. It isn't just suppressing the gag reflex and getting it down. There's a lot that goes into it. Everything he mentioned just sort of highlights the danger that's involved, which I think is really important for people to understand and to appreciate what people are doing for their entertainment. So I think it's great working with Dan because he knows things that just very few humans know, right? His experiences, his perspectives. And so that gives the book something really that no other book has. It's nothing I could have achieved on my own because it's not something I've ever done and I don't want to do it. So I'll add that, no desire. But Dan's able to bring this real perspective that no one else can really bring, in this knowledge. So that was really, I think, a huge bonus to the book, and that's why the subtitle is a sword swallower's history of sword swallowing, because it's coming from Dan's perspectives and the research that he started 25 years ago, and then all the connections he has. We were able to speak with a lot of relatives of deceased sword swallowers, as well as we just spoke again actually with the world's oldest living sword swallower, who's about to turn 90 and still swallowing swords. I'll add 77 years worth of swallowing swords. So between his knowledge, his perspectives, and connections, I think we really put together something pretty special and unique, and there's really no other book like it.
Well, we just got about a minute, but I've got to ask, Dan, when you first started doing this and you were hell-bent on becoming the sword swallower that you are, the premier sword swallower that you are, what did your friends and family say when you first got into this?
I didn't tell my parents. My mom was a registered nurse. My dad was an x-ray technician. I did not tell them during the 4 years that I was practicing. And then after I got a sword down the first time, I could get a piece of metal down. It took about 2 seconds, but it took me about 5 years to put a good show together and be able to tour. And now it's taken me to 60 countries around the world. But most people find it very fascinating. And in the first few years, I talked about it at length, way too much. Now I've learned to kind of bite my tongue. And when I'm flying on a plane, somebody says, "What do you do?" I say, "Well, I work in steel." And that's about it. But now I can tell them I'm an author of the book, To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. And that makes it a little bit more interesting.
And in hindsight, as your career took a hold, did your parents say, "Well, yeah, that's Dan"?
Yeah, I got called back to Waldorf College for I got the alumni distinguished alumni award there, and I did a command, sold out performance for all the staff, the president of the school, and everything. And my mom and dad were there. A lot of my past classmates and friends I'd traveled in India with, where I first saw sword swallowing, were there. And my dad came up to me with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Now I get what you do. It's not about the swords. It's about helping people find their purpose and calling." And he got it. And then it made me proud. Dad just died last month at 94, and I'm just glad that he understood what my purpose and calling was. And now I'm trying to reach more people with the book, To the Hilt.
Did your dad get a chance to see the book before it was published?
No, he did not. He saw the cover, and that was it. So I'm disappointed in that, but I'm glad it's out there for other people to see and other people to read.
Well, congratulations on the book. The book is called To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing, written by Dan Meyer and, of course, Marc Hartzman. Guys, thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thanks for
so
having
much,
me,
Peter. Great to be here.
Dan Meyer and Marc Hartzman, authors of To the Hilt, A Sword Swallower's History of Sword Swallowing. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0808, and you'll find the links to Dan's and Marc's sites, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order their book directly.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.